Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Sam Tom Miller here. Today we are talking about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the original, I want to say from 1974, but I'll have to double check that. And if I seem rushed today, it's because I am. I got a lot of stuff going on. Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a franchise that I have not really ever been into. Certainly not on the level of things like Halloween, Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, other contemporaries. Certainly not on the level of things like Scream and Saw and Paranormal Activity, more modern franchises. I would say it was maybe, for me, like a step above, interest-wise, than the Hellraiser series, because Hellraiser, I only ever owned the very first original movie. That was the only one I had ever watched until the reboot that just came out, which I have a video on, as well as the original. But Texas Chainsaw Massacre, this is what I was working with. I owned the remake. I owned this prequel. I couldn't even tell you if this is a prequel to the original or a prequel to the remake. I assume a prequel to the remake because it looks newish. And then I owned this thing. Now, at least this, if not all of these, were purchased secondhand. I used to live near a bookstore, and they would have these deals every once in a while where you could pay $30 for a tote bag, and anything that you could fit in that tote bag was covered under that $30. And most people used it for books. I used it for movies, so I would just go through and shove anything that I was even kind of interested in there. Sometimes I'd get multiple bags. They also had a teacher discount, so it was less than $30 per bag. But that's where this came from, and I get it. It's a chainsaw blade. But there's no distinguishing information on this about what version of this movie this is. I mean, there's chapter titles. So if you're familiar with the chapter titles of the movie, I guess you could figure that out. But there's no year on it for the actual movie. Again, there's DVD-ROM stuff that obviously is newer than the original movie, but I had always assumed that this was some kind of anniversary edition, hence the special casing, because this, discs don't even stay in. This kind of gimmick is not something that a lot of modern movies do. So to me, I always thought that this was a copy of the original. But again, it doesn't have any year on there. It doesn't have the actors' names listed anywhere on this case. There's a pocket in this last flap here that I assume at one point had some kind of information booklet, but that was missing by the time I owned it. And there was probably some kind of sleeve that went over this at one point also, because this is that doesn't look good on a shelf. So, what I thought I owned were the original, the remake, and the prequel, probably to the remake. And as for which ones I had seen, I couldn't tell you. I know I've seen at least one of them. Don't know which one that was. So, as I prepared to watch this movie, I put this in. And the intro started what seemed like fairly old school, but I didn't want to waste a bunch of time watching something that wasn't the original, and B, try and figure out as I was watching it if it was the original or not. So I skipped through the credits, and the first piece of credits in this movie was Jessica Biel. So, not the original. It's just another copy of this. So I have two copies of the same movie in very, very different cases. Luckily, it's not difficult to find a digital copy of the original film online for not very much money. So that's what I did. I watched it online. And before I get into it, I understand and I know and I acknowledge the major part that this movie played in the development of horror, and particularly if not the creation, then the solidification of the slasher genre. And I don't want to take any of that away from it, but I don't think this movie is very good. I certainly didn't enjoy watching it. But I got a lot of notes and I'm in a hurry, so let's get into it. First of all, one of the main characters is in a wheelchair. I feel like that doesn't happen very often, and I think it's weird that this isn't mentioned more for that. Maybe it's because he's kind of a whiny guy, but like inclusion and representation should include all types of people. So like, Professor X is probably the most high profile movie character in a wheelchair, but like even Steel I've heard mentioned as like some of the few films that include characters in wheelchairs. What is it? Mac and Me, the weird McDonald's ET ripoff movie. Is that the one that has a kid in a wheelchair? So like, there's not very many high-profile movies that feature people in wheelchairs, regardless of the qualities of that person. So I was kind of surprised that I've never realized that. And again, I don't think I've seen this movie before, but I honestly don't know. Even after even after watching it, I don't know. So if I knew that before, I had forgotten it. News. We start with several minutes of just a radio announcer talking about what's been going on. The first bit of it, we get a visual of some corpses at a cemetery to kind of go along with what he's saying. But then there's just weird graphics going on for the rest of it. And it's not engaging. A still image followed by nothingness with several minutes of radio news coverage it doesn't pull me into the movie. It's not engaging. It's boring. It's the opposite of show, don't tell. It's tell. Not a great start right off the bat. Then we finally get to our characters talking about the planets in retrograde. I just kind of found this humorous because I know some people that are really, really into that. I don't believe in that stuff myself. I don't like to make fun of people, though, that are into it. I think it can be interesting. And if it's the kind of thing where it can help you process and deal with things, hey, I'm all for it. But if you're the type of person that just uses it to blame your problems on and kind of not ever get around to working on yourself, that's not the fault of astrology. That's the fault of that person. So I just thought that was kind of interesting because I know some people that are really into that, and it made me think of them. So then we're talking with his hitchhiker about meat processing and how to kill the animals and all this stuff. And I'm just like, this is gross. This is not enjoyable for me. It's not scary, right? It's not horror. I'm not scared of this. This is just unpleasant to talk about. And maybe that was the point. And I did write it was oddly engaging. Because, like, I made breakfast to eat during this movie. And while these scenes were going on, I did not want to touch my breakfast. I was just, like, staring at the screen, like, please talk about something else so I can eat my food. So, kind of engaging, but not the kind of stuff that I want to watch. And then, this is a comment that's been made about the early Halloween movies. It's really at play in this movie. There's just long shots of nothing. Just shots that take a long time, that are just people walking around in real time, doing mundane things in real time, cars driving in real time, characters exploring in real... It's so boring. And, like, I get it. The movie didn't have a budget, but, like, why make it so long then? Just make it a short film, right? And then it's easier for people to watch because it doesn't take as much time. It's just so boring to see all these people doing nothing in real time. Static camera shots that is not one take shots that are really interesting now where the camera does a lot of stuff. Just sitting still while things happen. And by things, I mean nothing. Next note. Was it common in the 70s to just walk into strangers' houses? This is just one of those things that, like, I'll never know if it's a movie thing or if it was actually a thing. And it's like, he knocked on the door and the door fell open. So it's not like he busted his way in. It's not even like he intentionally tried to open the door. But even if the door falls open, why would you go into a stranger's house? yes, he's interested in gas, but they're not in an emergency situation, right? I get if you're in an emergency situation, bust through someone's house. I get that, right? That's not where they're at. They're at an inconvenient situation. And I don't think that justifies going into somebody's house. And not only does the first guy do it, Kirk, but then later Pam does it. And it's like a little bit more understandable that she does it because she knows that Kirk went in there and he hasn't come out. So she's concerned for his safety. So there's a little bit more there. And then later, Jerry goes through there, right? And again, Jerry, there's a little bit more there because he sees Kirk's jacket on the porch, but it would not be unreasonable to think that they went there and tried to knock and waited around for a while, and he put his jacket down and forgot about it. But he used that as justification to go in. Unless they come out and get him. I don't remember. But it's just like, why? Why are people going into strangers' houses? Was that a thing in the 70s? Was that a thing in Texas? I don't know. It's hard for me to buy into this story when I'm just like, why would you do that? I do DoorDash, right? And sometimes the screen door situation is awkward, right? If because sometimes they just say leave it at the door, you don't knock. But sometimes they ask you to knock at the door. And it's like if there's a screen door and you knock on that door, they might not hear it, right? Because that's not actually the door that's inside their house. So there's still the second door that's going to muffle that sound. So usually if they ask me to knock, I will open the screen door and knock on the main door. But sometimes the main door is ajar and it's not closed all the way. You know what I don't do? Push the door open and start trying to talk to them and or walk inside their house. If that main door is ajar, I'll just close the screen door again, knock on that, and leave. Leatherface out of nowhere. So yeah, when Kirk first goes into this house, there's not really any build-up to Leatherface. They're showing the pelts on the wall and the bones and everything, so they're getting that atmosphere built up. But, like, we don't get any kind... And, again, I know this was early in the slasher genre, so I know these tropes that I'm used to hadn't been around yet, but, like, we don't get any POV shots of the killer peeking around corners or whatever. We don't get any kind of wrestling or shadows moving around. We get nothing. It's just, boom, Leatherface is there, takes him, door shuts. Now we've got a killer. Very, very abrupt. And then I just wrote, Leatherface looks silly, not menacing. And, like, obviously his appearance changes throughout the movies, as do all of these killers. And whatever Leatherface movie I've seen, I feel like I remember him looking more menacing. So I don't think it was this one, but again, I just absolutely could not tell you. But, like, he just looks silly. And, like, they kind of treat him silly, that his family members do later, so maybe he's supposed to, but I'm like, if this is your flagship villain, shouldn't he look scarier? Like, the mask thing looks weird, and, like, obviously anybody running at you with a chainsaw is going to pose some kind of a threat, but, like, him as a character just looks almost like a parody of one of these killers than a flagship killer. So then he kills Kirk with a sledgehammer. He hangs Pam up on a hook. And he kills Jerry with some other kind of blunt. Maybe it's another sledgehammer. I don't remember. So I'm like, there's only two hero characters left. And he hasn't used the chainsaw yet. And so I wrote, you know, of all the... And again, I know this was early. But this is just my perspective now. Of all the other big slasher franchises, right? Halloween and Friday the 13th are both named after a day when events happen. Nightmare on Elm Street, named after an event, an occurrence, right? Some of the later ones are just called Freddy, right? Freddy's Dead, New Night, Freddy's Revenge, right? Different things like that. A lot of the Friday the 13th ones are more known by their Jason titles, right? So we're focusing on events or characters. Something like Chucky, right? It's just named, I guess the first one was called Child's Play, but then all the rest are just called Chucky. So it's weird to name the movie, first of all, after the weapon, right? It would be like if Halloween was called The Haddonfield Knife Stabbings. if, Nightmare on Elm Street was called Springwood? The Ohio finger glove killings. It's weird to name it after a weapon, but if you're going to name it after a weapon, you gotta use that weapon more, right? And, it's in some shots, and maybe he starts it a couple times earlier on, but, he only kills one person in this movie with the chainsaw. He does a lot of chasing with the chainsaw, which we'll get to. But Franklin is the only character that he actually kills with the chainsaw. I find that disappointing in a movie called The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I want more chainsaw killings. And then I wrote, chainsaw, it's a bad weapon. It's a bad weapon for one of these killers to use. It's not very stealthy. Again, I know this is early in the genre. I gotta keep saying that or else people are gonna yell at me. But, you think about characters like Michael and Jason just, stalking people silently. And the scary part is you don't know where they are, right? They could be in the shadows anywhere. Characters like Freddy is using dream magic to hide and sneak up on you, right? Characters like Chucky are small and can hide and go around, whatever. The Ghostface killer in the Scream movies, he's always hiding, and the fact that there's two of them means that they can... Right? Stealth is very much a part of these movies. You know what's not stealthy? A gas-powered chainsaw! So, the people you're chasing always know exactly where you are. You're never going to sneak up on them or surprise them when you're chasing them with a chainsaw. Also, you can't hear the people you're chasing if you've got a gas-powered chainsaw, right? Knives are silent. Machetes are silent. Chucky, I guess, also uses a knife, right? The finger knives are silent. So if you're stalking someone and they make any kind of a noise, footsteps, running into something, knocking something over, tripping and falling, any kind of noise that they make, they're going to hear you and you can follow you. That doesn't work with a chainsaw. So what do they have to do to have some kind of way for Leatherface to chase, what's her name, Sally? Because, for a while, yeah, he's just got line of sight. But there's a part where she runs out into the dark and, she is wearing pretty fluorescent clothes, which, come on, just cover yourself in mud, Sally. What are you doing? But if she wasn't just absolutely screaming her head off the entire time, she would have been able to get away because he wouldn't have been able to hear her because his chainsaw is going to drown everything out. Now, I've talked about this before. I think, weirdly, in Spider-Man 2, my Spider-Man 2 video, but maybe some other videos. But, I don't think it's realistic for people, even in these super terrifying situations, to just be constantly screaming their absolute brains out for extended periods of time. Screams are a reaction, a shock, a surprise. Screams are a short burst in reaction to something surprising, right? And crying, sobbing, that kind of stuff, yeah, that goes on for a long time. But I have never in my life experienced myself or anyone else have extended periods of just screaming as loud as they possibly can for fear, right? They've done it out of anger. They've done it to try to get people to find them, right? And some of this is that, which is calling for help, but most of it is not that. Most of it is just, screaming takes energy, and it takes air, and it takes a certain amount of strength, and you're wasting all of that, and giving Leatherface the perfect breadcrumb trail to follow you, because you just won't shut up, and I don't think that's how people act. I've never been chased by someone with a chainsaw, but that doesn't seem like a person would just be screaming, and it's so unpleasant to watch. There are several minutes. I didn't time it because I was watching it on a weird thing on my phone that was casting to my TV, so I couldn't rewind it very easily, but I wish I could have. There are several minutes of Leatherface chasing Sally in real time with long static camera shots where all you hear is a chainsaw and screaming. And that's just not a pleasant viewing experience. It's not scary. It's not horror. It's not something that's going to keep me up at night. It's just unpleasant. And I realize that me right now whining in this voice is also unpleasant. But this is at least genuine. But let's move on. I don't want to be unpleasant. She goes to the, father's gas station, whatever. And Leatherface just stops. And I'm like, why does Leatherface stop? We don't know at that point that that's his father, but it turns out to be his father. And what does he do? Takes her right back to Leatherface. So why did Leatherface stop chasing her? Why didn't the guy just go in and kill her and then take her back? I don't get it. Maybe they didn't want to kill her. But like, that's what they eventually do with the grandpa. I thought for a while that they were going to do other things with her, which I think comes into play in some of the sequels. And there's the weird thing where they, like, feed her blood to the grandpa, which, by the way, one of my notes is just, is that dude alive? Because there's no way that dude's alive. But I think he's supposed to be alive. But that's not what any alive person looks like. But yeah, it's just one of those things that they do to build the suspense, but it doesn't make any sense at all in the actual story that's going on. Why does Leatherface just not keep going in there? Even if they're just going to bind her and take her back, it doesn't make sense for Leatherface to leave. The actor seems confused. So whoever is playing this father, I'm going to keep calling him the father. I don't know if that's accurate, but that seems to be the role that he's taken. The actor seems confused about who this guy is, because there'll be some parts where he's like, don't worry, miss, don't worry, right? No one's going to hurt you, blah, blah, blah. And then there are other parts where he's just laughing hysterically at how upset she is. And then later, when Leatherface and the hitchhiker are messing with her, he's like, hey, don't mess with her. Just leave her alone, blah, blah, blah. And then she's in distress and screaming. And then in another shot, he's laughing hysterically right along with them. And, like, he's like, oh, I hope you're comfortable down there, while he's stabbing her with a group. And, like, parts of that are just that this guy is messed up, right? And I get some of that, but, like, the way the actor's face just changes so much from scene to scene, sometimes even within the same shot. It's just like he's trying out different things because he doesn't know how they want this character to be, and they just put it all in. It's not consistent as a character. Then we're back at the house, and I saw the wheelchair tucked against the wall before they pointed it out, and I just wrote down, did they keep Franklin's wheelchair? And then later on, Leatherface, like, points to it to show that he brought it back. And so I'm like, yeah, they kept his wheelchair, which is like, I don't know, I guess maybe they just wheeled his body up rather than carrying it. And the wheelchair, I guess, could be useful for moving your corpses around, but just seemed like an odd inclusion to me. And there was, like, no blood on it. Which, I read that this movie took out a lot of the gore to try to give it a better rating, which, number one, I think it really hurts the movie, because you'll see this meat hook, and then he's lifting her up to go on the hook, and again, I know this was early, and now I've got all these expectations from decades since then, but, like, you're expecting to see her go on the meat hook, but it just cuts to a farther shot where she's already on the meat, and there's, like, so many things like that. So first of all, it makes the movie worse, because you don't get those things that you're expecting, but then number two, it didn't work, and the movie was still rated R, so might as well have left them in, right? Then I have, wait, is that dude alive? I already talked about that. Then we get these super close-ups. So when they're all at the dinner table, the camera gets, like, this freaking close to Sally. And it's, like, all these weird shots of her. And I'm watching it, and I'm like, are they... How do I say this without being too adult? I wasn't sure if they were trying to imply that the men were doing some kind of something to her, but it would cut back, and all four of them, I guess, if you're counting the grandpa, they were all just still sitting there, laughing at her. So I'm like, what are these weird extreme close-ups? Again, it's just multiple minutes of these shots of nothing, where all you hear is screaming and this dumb giggling, which to me is just not enjoyable to watch. At one point I wrote, this is just cringe. When you've got these three that are just fighting with each other, and the dad just keeps doing this, and it's like, he's not any stronger than the hitchhiker. He's definitely not stronger than Leatherface. I can't buy into why, and, like, the hitchhiker even, like, says that he doesn't respect him. He's like, you're just the cook, blah, blah, blah. So it's like, I was expecting some kind of mutiny against that guy, right? But, like, it never happens. And I just don't buy that this puny old man is somehow physically in control of these much younger, healthier, stronger men. But they're all their interactions. Again, I get there's an element there of they are creepy, right? And that can lead to them being scary, but that's not what I'm talking about here. Aside from that, it just felt very cringy to me. Then we get this really, really prolonged sequence where they're trying to help the grandfather smash in Sally's head with this hammer. Again, more cringe. She escapes, she gets out, and it's daylight. And I just wrote in big old letters, how is it morning? Because most of this has been in real time. And she wasn't ever unconscious at any point. So the only big cut we get is after Jerry has died, Pam and Kirk and Jerry are all dead. And then it cuts to Sally and Franklin standing out by the truck, and it's pitch black, so we know some time has passed. But that is, I refuse to believe that takes place the following morning just before dawn, right? That very clearly is that night after the sun has gone down, and they're like, wow, I can't believe these guys aren't back yet, right? And that's why they're concerned. So, I don't know how this timeline makes any sense, because it's dark. It has just become dark. They go exploring. Franklin is the only person to get killed with the machete. Super long chase, but not, a 10-hour long chase. She goes to the gas station, gets taken back to the house. She's conscious this whole time, so it's not ever like she passed out. She's bound, put in this chair. They have this weird dinner, and there's a cut before dinner, but again, they're talking about making dinner before that. So it's not like we have 10 hours in between there. And then she escapes and runs out, and it's daylight. That took me out of it. I mean, not that I was that into it, but any amount of into it that I was, that took me out of it. Leatherface cuts his own leg because he's using the worst weapon that you could possibly use as a slasher villain. And then we have no ending. We get this one semi-truck driver that stops to try to help them out. He ends up just running away, leaving his semi. And then we get another person driving another truck, who I assume to be the grandpa, or the father again, just in a different truck, but apparently not. She climbs in, drives away. Leatherface does a weird dance with his chainsaw because he's silly and not menacing. And then the movie's over. There's no ending. So, you know what?